Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today we are going to look at the weekly metagame breakdown for the standard best of 3 traditional standard format. These are the best decks up to Mythic rank, as well as looking at some recent MTGO leagues. This upcoming weekend is the Qualifier Weekend. It is standard best of 3. There's both the mix of the play-in that gives you your last chance. Think of it like a last chance qualifier for a RCQ. And then we have the event on the weekend itself. Standard best of 3 will be the format. So we're going to look at a bunch of different decks here, things you may want to consider for the event. We're going to get the data, like I said, from MTG. If you want to use the tool, track your win rates, get a whole bunch of cool stats. Link is in the video description. And then I'll paste and timestamp all these deck lists so you can use them. We're going to start just kind of looking at what the arena popularity of the day is. And then we'll jump into the decks. So in Mythic rank right now, Esper self-bounce is about 15% of the meta. Domain is about 12. Mono red is about 11-ish%. And then we have Dimir midrange at about 10. The Omni combo 8%. Azorius control 7. We have various Gruul prowess decks at 6. And then the Oculus deck at 5%. So kind of rock, paper, scissors on top like we've seen. And then some other decks trying to attack it at a different angle. Both bounce and domain have come down from like 20-ish%. The others have been relatively on par in terms of percentage wise the last little bit. So we will look stats down in Mythic rank. When I just did Mythic, it was basically 3 decks, the bounce, domain, and mono red. So opening it up just to get a little bit more in terms of win rate stats. So we have 42,000 games played versus if we were to just look Mythic, it's 16, so a little bit bigger population to account for. Mono red on Arena is the highest win rate deck. This one's at 67%. A lot of the decks are in best of 3 adapting Sunspine links in the main. Between the main and the sideboard, you have access to 4 copies. This is particularly good against domain, also pretty reasonable against like, there's a Dimir Doomsday deck running around, Golgari decks. Incidentally, even the Pixie deck doesn't play many basics, so you can maybe 4 or 5 damage them out of there while shutting off their life gain. It also doesn't get hit by temporary lockdown. So trimming on some numbers of the lightning strikes to accommodate that. This list is on 21 lands. You'll also see the addition of 2 Soulstone Sanctuary in the mana base. The mouse for the mouse package, and then gives you another way to have a creature land if in case the games do go long. But otherwise, your mouse package, your Screaming Nemesis in the main. Sideboard, you have Lithomantic Barrage, blue and white decks. You have Torch Tower for the mirrors, creature decks like Low to the Ground. Glittering Bolt, good against Preacher, 4 toughness style things. At one point, Aclazots, this was a big target for it, but just gives you a little bit more reach in terms of that. Sentinel, the Nameless City, offense, defense, that's something you want to kill as quick as possible. Against the kind of go wide decks, you also have Pyroclasm. You can kind of board out differently, where in the creature mirrors, Hired Claw typically doesn't attack that well, so you can just scale up a little bit. Most of your prowess creatures can dodge it anyways. You have Urbrass Forge for the grindier matchups, the control matchups, stuff like that. If you do see Authority at the consoles, this isn't a card you want to have in, so keep that in mind. Witchstalker and Sunspine. Case of the Crimson Rose is also a card I like. I've been playing it in Gruul. Out of the sideboard against like the bounce decks, the grindier matchups. They bounce it, you could usually get some value, and then it gives you some card advantage and grind in the longer games. We then have Esper self-bounce, 65%. So a lot of these decks are adopting some number of stock-ups. I've seen 3 to 4 in a lot of the lists. Sometimes you'll see 1 Overlord of the Baelmerk in the mana base. You have access, obviously, to your Hopeless Nightmare, pick it up multiple times, force them to discard, same as your removal package. This list here is also playing Dreams of Steel and Oil. This allows you to have some discard. It exiles as well, so if you do hit Baloth or stuff like that, it's not too bad. You can hit the Overlords, take cards out of mono red, which is useful in that regard. Kaidos, and then this town, obviously, shenanigans with Storm Chaser's Talent. Sideboard, you have Gix Command for the go wide aggressive decks. In the mirrors or heavy like removal decks, you have the room. You're basically playing it for Cadaver Lab. Just you return a creature from your graveyard to your hand, and then you say, for example, you return a Pixie. You can pick this up and then just kind of rebuy it that way there. Creature could come in against the aggressive decks, kind of the control decks. Just lets you attack, provide some card advantage. Graveyard Hate, the Low to the Ground decks. A lot of 1-drops, you can deal with them. Destroy Evil for enchantments, bigger things, really good against Domain. Brim Bauble for the aggressive decks. Ghost Vacuum for Graveyard Hate, and Duress for the control-y to Domainish style decks. Then have Domain, 62%. So base green-white, you're obviously a Beans deck, taking advantage of like Ride's End to draw you cards. Overlords in here draw you cards. Leyline draws you cards. You have the Lines of Zur to animate your Overlords for value. These decks are starting to curve down their sweeper package, where once you'd see maybe 4 Sunfalls, instead respecting red in the aggressive decks, Temporary Lockdown, Day of Judgment, Sunfall mixed in. Analyze the Pollen early game can help you hit your line drops, late game help you tutor key pieces. Sideboard, you have Nissa for the mirror, control matchups, stuff like that, grind your card. Atraxa, good in the mid-rangey style battles, gets you a bunch of value out of it. Hellish Norn for anything heavy ETB, including the mirror. Obstinate Baloth for Pixie decks, things with a lot of discard. Can come in against mono red as well. Even if you cast it for 4 mana, can be a suitable blocker and gain you some life. Stock up in the grindier matchups. Terra Sunder, good in the mirror. Rest in Peace for Graveyard Hate. Paw Patch for the mirror style of decks. Negates for cheap counter, big mana decks, stuff like that. And Elspeth Smite for the aggressive deck. So notably with this, there's no authority of the consoles. So if you don't see it, then Forge is a reasonable card. It's not the fastest, but against like non-stop sweepers, it's okay against the deck. Dimir midrange, 60%. So not the bounce elements, kind of the mid-rangey. So we have Fairy Mastermind in here. You have the Deep Cavern Bats as hand hate. Blood Pit's Drowner to tap stuff down. Shuffle it away. You can draw cards off like Enduring Curiosity. You have your Kaidos. 1 of Shelly, 1 Gix command in the main. Bunch of cheap removal. Spyglass in here helps with the map tokens. Some cheap counter and Phantom Interference. And then just go for the throats. Also in Sanctuary in this deck. Also works as a ninja, so it pairs nicely with Kaido and mana base. Sideboard's got a lot of 1-ofs for the most part. Gix command, again, creature mirrors, sweepers, kind of rebuy, make you a big creature. Shelly really stops like the red decks, anything that's drawing a lot of cards. Urtai as a kind of stifle effect, as well as counterspell on a creature body. Tishana, anything with heavy activated abilities. Faebloom Trick can be reasonable in the mirrors. Anything that's kind of going in on 1 creature. The Leyline decks, for example. Shelly's Edict gets Kaido, gets kind of bigger threats. Cheap counters. Fairy Mastermind, good against the Beans deck. More cheap removal and Anoint. Cheap Disruption and Spell Disappears. Graveyard Hate and Duress as hand hate. Moving on, we go to Omniscience combo, 54% on this one. So it's a deck you have to respect. It's fairly consistent. Basically, the deck's just all about self-milling, drawing, discarding, putting cards into your graveyard. What you're trying to do is put Omniscience into your graveyard, bring it back with Ebola's Awakening, dig to either find Invasion of Arcavios or have it in hand, cast Invasion. Invasion goes into your sideboard. You get this version here is not playing. So sometimes they'll have the blue season that you bounce everything back to hand and create a token copy of Omniscience. But basically with Johann Stopgap, you could keep bouncing Invasion of Arcavios till you find your second copy. Then you get This Town Ain't Big Enough. You pick up your invasions, you get Haunt the Network, and then just kind of loop invasions and casting these 2 cards to drain out your opponent. Sideboard wise, Ghost Vacuum for the mirrors, graveyard decks, Disenchant for hate pieces, along with Get Lost, Grand Abolisher, any deck that's looking to play a lot of counter spells or interaction instant speed. You'll also notice that there's a Cavern of Souls in the sideboard that you can board into to name human, so it comes in uncounterable. Long River's Pull, just a generic counter spell that can be used in a pinch. Negate is cheap counters, stock up for the grindier matchups. Temporary Lockdown for the aggressive decks, along with Day of Judgment, and then these are your combo pieces. The deck that's been picking up popularity on MTGO is its like prowess, is it spell slingers. There's a couple different variants, but for the most part, it's a combination of Monastery Swiftspear, Slick Shot Show Off, Emberheart Challenger. So not like the most package, just prowess threats. You have Opt, Monstrous Rage into the Flood Maw, so a bunch of cheap interaction, Sleight of Hand. Enter the Enigma, can make it unblockable, just cycles, Bolt Wave is burn, a couple copies of stock up in here to refill your hand, Storm Chaser's talent as well. So no bounce package, just Storm Chasers to basically be another prowess creature that you can rebuy stuff from your graveyard. Big thing that's enabling this is the River Pyre Verges. Sideboard, you have Spell Pierce for cheap disruption, Dive Down as protection. This also gives +3 toughness, so it gets around Nowhere to Run. Torch Tower as cheap removal. Mockingbird could be just more creature density for your deck, but also copy your opponent's threats. Screaming Nemesis, stuff like that. Unable to scream to deal with bigger things, and even just like Nemesis could be reasonable. We have Jeskai Oculus. This one won the Standard Challenge. EV Hunter won 10-0. So this deck here, all about drawing and discarding, putting into your graveyard Oculus. You get it back with Helping Hand or Recommission. Inti draws discards, puts counters on things, gives you some virtual card advantage. Theme Core Scholar draws discards. Your Fear of Missing Out's in here. Pairing that with Prophecydetic Memory, that lets you redistribute counters based on that. So just a lot of draw discard style effects. Torch Towers, removal, Spell Pierce, into the Flood Maw, Get Lost, kind of all mixed into there. Sideboard, you have Ghost Vacuum for graveyard decks. Filigree Silex can be dealt with various hate pieces out of your opponent's decks. Negate, cheap counter, Destroy Evil, Domain, big mana decks. Pyroclasm for the aggressive decks. Decks that are bringing in a lot of graveyard hate, you can bring in Chandra, attacks at a different angle, and Sheltered by Ghost for the aggressive decks. Moving on, we got Leyline Red, or Leyline Gruul. Leyline of Resonance, get into your opening hand, gets put into play for free value, folks. This one won a 5-0 by Decal. So just a bunch of aggressive threats. You do have access to a turn 2 kill, Leyline, couple pump effects, and then you just fling it with Sellsword, or Scamp is self-enabling to sacrifice to deal the damage. Might of the Meek Cycles gives you a bonus, turn inside out, power boost, and if they kill something, you get a creature back, Rage, and then Snakeskin Veil. In the sideboard, more Snakeskin Veil. You'll sometimes see Overprotect because it gives a boost in terms of power. Dreadmaw's Ire can deal with Artifact, Paw Patch Formation, enchantments, or flyers. Burst Lightning, just cheap removal. Questing Druid for sometimes if they're going to overboard on removal, you can board out of the ley lines, kind of go from there. Defend the Rider as another protection effect, and then Giant Growth, just another pump effect. If you're doing Nowhere to Run, you can kind of boost out of that. You'll sometimes see them play Innkeeper's Talent, just as another way to kind of board out of the ley line and just play like aggressive Gruul. Moving on, we go to Azorius Control. So this deck here, win conditions, Overlord of the Bale, or the Mistmoors, and Bezas. You also have Jace that can mill out your opponent, and some utility lands. But just a lot of interaction with this deck. Get Lost, Deduce, No More Lies, Ride's End is cheap removal, 3 steps ahead is counter, Sweepers and Day of Judgment, Lockdown, and Sunfall, and then Stock Up helps bridge to get the deck together. These decks were lacking a true consistent way to refill your hand, which the Stock Up provides. Sideboard, Wiltleaf Liege for the discard decks, Jace in the mirrors, Domain, stuff like that. Dissection Tools for the aggressive decks, Beza for the aggressive decks. For Domain or kind of slower decks, you have Riverturn Monument to mill them out. Negates, cheap counters, Rest in Peace for graveyard decks, Devote Decree. Flexible in the context that it can hit both, say, a red deck, but also hit a Kaido. So it has some flexibility as a sideboard slot to hit multiple things. Then you have Tishana's Tidebinder, anything looking to have a lot of activated abilities. Lastly, we have Gruul Aggro, Gruul Power. Me and my Mungus got 5-0 with this. There's a few different ways you can build this deck here, some configurations, but these are usually marked by Innkeeper's Talent being in the deck. You have Torch Towers, Witchstalker, Monstrous Rage. You might see Burst Lightning instead of Torch the Tower in some of the versions. So Burst Lightning is more flexible because it can go face, where Torch Tower is more just dedicated to creature mirror. Higher likelihood this could be a dead card. Emberheart Challengers, 3 Paw Patch Recruits, good against the heavy kind of interaction decks. Hired Claw, Questing Druid for the kind of a little bit more interaction in terms of grind. Heartfire, Manifold, you have your mouse package, and Screaming Nemesis. You'll notice 2 Soulstone Sanctuaries and 1 Restless Ridgeline in the mana base. Garages, blue and white decks. Paw Patch for the Domain decks. You'll see 2 Sunspine Links. Sentinel of the Nameless City could come in against the Nowhere to Run style decks, just lets you play a little bit more mid-range, provide card advantage, gets around temporary lockdown. Obliterating Bolt is cheap removal. Pyroclasm for the go-by decks. Ghost Vacuum. That's it for the week. Let me know what you've been playing, what you've been liking, and what you're going to be taking to the event. Good luck to all those playing, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching.